I'm sure many people in the world today, and even in our communities, know all about God and who He is. But the Bible calls for us to do more than to know about God. It actually calls for us to follow Him. Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Monday. There are many who are listed in the Bible for following God with their life, especially the followers of Jesus Christ, or even those who are listed in Hebrews chapter 11 in that hall of fame of faith, who were faithful servants of the Lord. But there is this one Old Testament character who sticks out in my mind as Caleb. He is the Old Testament spy from the children of Israel. Actually, we first read of Caleb as the spy who was searching out the promised land of Canaan. He, along with Joshua and 10 other spies who apparently were not named perhaps because of their lack of faith in God. But when the 10 spies came back with their report, they said the land was flowing with milk and honey, but there were giants in the land as well. There were also great walled cities that they would never be able to overcome. That was the report of the 10. While Joshua and Caleb proclaimed their faith in God to deliver them and urged the people to enter and take over the land that God had given them. Well, with the majority being fearful, they turned back into the wilderness, and they wandered there for some 40 years while that generation died off as a punishment for their lack of faith. Now I want you to fast forward 40 years, and the people have come back to the promised land to overthrow the Canaanites. They are being led now by Joshua, and when the land was to be divided by tribes for an inheritance, Caleb spoke up to Joshua. His claim was to take the mountain region of Hebron with these giants called the sons of Anak who lived there. His testimony was that he deserved this land as he had been faithful while others were fearful. His phrase in Joshua chapter 14 and verse 8 says, "Nevertheless, my brethren, those who went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord my God." Unlike the fearful crowds that cried out and even wanted to stone Moses for wanting to enter the promised land, they would not enter. But Caleb had trusted in the Lord. Even at the age of 85 now, Caleb is saying, "Give me this land which will show our faith in God. And even at my advanced stage, we will overcome the greatest threat, the mountain of Hebron." I don't know what is more impressive. That the scared Israelites did not poorly influence him, that he remained faithful, or the fact that he continued to follow the Lord despite the wilderness wanderings where they were in the land of heathen and those who worshiped idols. His speech to Joshua was remarkable because he says, "Remember 40 years ago when we first determined to enter that land and we were turned away? Well, I'm still as strong now as I was then." Caleb even repeated the words of Moses from 40 years ago. "So Moses swore on that day, saying, 'Surely the land where your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance, and your children's inheritance forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God.'" This phrase is actually used multiple times in Joshua chapter 14 to remind us that Caleb had wholly followed the Lord. Now, we know there were obstacles, just like the other spies who might have melted the heart of God's people, he said. They had spent some 40 years in the land of the heathen who worshiped idols and false gods. Besides the normal temptations that we regularly face every day to follow after this world or to turn away from God. But for some 85 years now, Caleb had wholly followed his God and trusted in his guidance. Now, one of the blessed rewards that he has received here is knowing that God is faithful to his followers even that many years later to bring them back to the promised land. Another reward, by the way, that he had was that the land of inheritance in Hebron that he had wanted, God allowed him to conquer that mountain and to take it over. But surely his greatest reward was hearing his God say after this lifetime here, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. You have been faithful. Enter thou into the joys of thy Lord for all eternity." That is what God has for those who are willing to follow him throughout this life and in this world. So the question is, are we wholly following the Lord our God?